What drives a man to destroy what he claims to love? That's what we're going to be exploring today. And I'm going to take a particular period of this Renaissance through Shakespeare. Now, this question has been explored by literary imaginative writers since Homer, but it's answered in different ways. And more specifically than answered in specific ways, it's explored in different ways. And there's a real value that I want to show you in how you think about and explore this question. And one of the ways of doing that is a lens that we have gotten from Renaissance times. Now, this is the 15 to 1600s is when we're looking at. We're looking at Shakespeare. We're looking at a play, Julius Caesar. And there's a character I'm going to try to focus on, which is the main character, although not the title character, which is an interesting question you can have at some point, of Brutus. So Brutus is the main character. Now, who this video is for, just really quickly, whether or not you have read Julius Caesar or watched a play or watched a movie is irrelevant. I want to make this a lecture to help you understand the broader way to approach and think about and enjoy Shakespeare for your own life, that it has personal resonance for you, that it can be a place that theater, that art can be a space for you to think about these really important ideas, especially as you get older, these ideas become more and more relevant. And I'll just say something I'm going to be pointing out throughout is I'll be drawing on a little bit of my own experience. And I can tell you, I've been a part of a movement, an intellectual movement to spread a particular philosopher's ideas throughout the world and the culture. And one thing I've noticed is this issue of destroying the thing we claim to love. So the love of this, and the goal of this spreading of this ideas around the world and having more people engage with this idea. I see the very people who espouse that as a desire are, innately undermining their own ability to do this. And basically the whole experience so far has been in 15 years of being a part of this. It's like, as me just trying to get people to engage with these works. That's all I care about. Is I see the battlefield of the movement, within the people, as just littered with dead relationships, murdered alliances. The question is what caused that on both sides, and just people completely unable and unwilling to build something in this movement. And to me, it's been a really interesting thing. And I think you can learn a lot about what causes the collapse of other movements, or what it takes to make a really good movement work, like the Abolition movement or the civil rights movement or the Civil War, or the pre-revolutionary movement for liberty in America and to govern yourself. So all those questions are relevant when you're exploring and reading Julius Caesar. It's all part of how you think about this imaginative work of literature. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is this very individualized, very human tendency to sabotage our own expressed highest ideals, and especially in idealists. So I've seen this so many times, as the movement I'm a part of is an idealistic movement of idealists are the ones who almost always defeat themselves. And it's not necessarily because of their idealism, but that's another question. That something else is going on that I think shapes them and causes an inability to succeed in this fashion. So we see this a lot, this sabotaging of friendships, romantic relationship, causes, movements, even entire organizations, entire industries, businesses that someone initially champions or loves, or it's what that motivates them, and they destroy it, right? Whether they do it intentionally or not is, not exactly the point, but we'll discuss both. So let me give you a real world example of what's going on today in 2025. You could see this on the pages of the, front pages of the newspaper, front pages. Elon Musk versus Sam Altman. So if you don't know the details of this, the details are not that important. What's really important is the core idea of these two champions, quote unquote champions of, open AI, or the development of artificial intelligence, are often the ones, in particular, I think Musk, but also I'm seeing this with Altman, are the ones destroying the ability of growing and developing more more technology in artificial intelligence to make it a flourishing field, which it's becoming, despite them, I think, thank goodness, to some degree, but despite their feud. But you could see problems already accruing that I think are resonant and relevant to this self-sabotaging aspect of us as humans and what causes this. Why do we do this? It looks like Musk is really undermining his original goal, which was the promoting of AI development. Now, he has all kinds of legal reasons for doing this. Maybe he's right in his legal issue. Just really briefly, his legal issue is that he helped to found OpenAI with Sam Altman as a nonprofit. And then Sam Altman turned it in, had a subsidiary that was a for-profit venture, and that's ChatGPT essentially that we're all buying, utilizing capitalist money and capitalism and investment to grow. And they have kind of different views of why this should happen. For Altman, he believes you need a lot of money, which is true, by the way. If you look at history, you need oodles of money to make these kinds of things actually spread. It cannot be done with a nonprofit. A nonprofit might be a good place to seed the beginnings and think about these things a little bit and maybe have a little bit of early development, but to really spread them across the world and get adoption in every business and organization, you have to have a for-profit institute that is raising money so that they could put forth these things. I mean, that we could talk about this at some other time if you don't see that, but that is I think a universal truth about how the spread of these things go. But Musk is going after him, and Musk could probably let it go, but he's going after him because he's has this product that he's creating, Sam Altman. And we know that Elon has his own product on X called Grok, which is an AI. So maybe there's some competition aspects here and Musk doesn't like it. The point isn't who's necessarily right in a legal courts case. It really seems like the two of them, particularly Musk, in my opinion, is trying to hamper potentially growing this industry and movement, maybe for his own purposes. Maybe he's right and we won't be able to know until the end, but I find it a really interesting loggerheads between these two giants who are trying to champion something and potentially one or both of them are undermining and sabotaging it. There's a quote early on in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar where Caesar is talking to Mark Antony, who's one of the people in his retinue in the Caesarian new way of doing politics. And he's Mark Antony's under the wing of Caesar. And Caesar says, "Let me have men that are fat." Cassius over there has a lean and hungry look. And there is a kind of interesting battle between the guys at the top of a field or the guys who created something and they are the more powerful ones and the ones who want to rise up. And there's an element here that we see all the way back to Julius Caesar, 1599 with Shakespeare. It's not only Musk and Altman that are possibly maligning or harming their own movement. Maybe they'll destroy it, or maybe they'll just hinder it a little bit more than it could be, or maybe it won't matter at all in the scheme of things. We'll see in history what happens. But they are doing things that I think are hindering it. We see this all the time. In Steve Jobs' first iteration of Apple, when he first started working on Apple, he built and co-founded Apple, and he was fired from his own company. And part of that was his own brash attitude and the way that he managed, and he wasn't, able to learn how to work with other people as the company really grew and flourished. And when he came back, though, he had learned a lot of those lessons, but of course, made the Apple that we all know, and all this stuff is operating. My camera, my laptop is all operating on Apple products. But what happened was he almost destroyed his own creation, the thing that he loved, which was Apple, through certain activities, viewpoints, inner processes that we're going to talk about that are expressed beautifully in Julius Caesar. I think you see this in movements all the time. You have these rivalries within a movement. Civil rights movement. We think of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. These are two visionaries with two particular ways of approaching this issue of having all individuals, but particularly Black Americans, be equal under the law. And they had very different approaches fundamentally on how to do this. Martin Luther King Jr. was much more a bigger tent person who wanted more people to cooperate with to achieve this thing. Malcolm X had a much more laser focused on working only within Black communities. Of course, he was also a Black Muslim, and he had specific views that he was opining. But the point isn't which view was right. You see this with the abolition movement. If you read about abolition, I don't know if you could see these, but there's some really interesting books on this whole history of abolition. And you have all kinds of personalities, all kinds of groups, all kinds of poets, church leaders, all kinds of people involved in it. And you often get these clashes between the leaders. And sometimes the clashes are done by individuals who are undermining their own cause, and sometimes even potentially destroying their own cause. I think William Lloyd Garrison is an example. He was a prominent abolitionist trying to end slavery, but he did a lot of potential harm. He did things that are, potentially good too, but he did a lot of harm by his very hardline stance that the Constitution was a covenant with death, quote unquote. It was a covenant from hell. And he wanted to throw out the whole thing, which made it very difficult for people who wanted to agree with him on certain issues to actually work with him and move into that movement. Luckily, there were other people involved who eventually figured out ways to align people toward achieving a movement goal. You see this with the pre-revolution liberty movement as well. You have people that were pushing it. Everyone's pushing this thing in the right direction. You have some people who are undermining it in various ways. I think in our personal lives, we do this. Marriages and family relationships most often implode from within. So this myth of the home wrecker. That's a myth. So no external individual, and there's just so much evidence of this from divorce lawyers and people specializing in divorce, that no one from outside really destroys a marriage. The true destruction occurs internally within the marriage. And it's often invisible to one or both of the participants. They don't really understand what's causing the rift between them. And we could think about an affair outside of the marriage, is outside the bonds of a marriage and outside the agreement between the two people, as a kind of assassination that one person might do toward the marriage as a whole, the ideal of the marriage. And I'm not talking about people who just have a tendency to do this for the sake of doing it and they have no morals. I'm talking about good people who try their best and want to be married, who love each other. That's the more common typical experience, is two people who do and did love each other. Something causes an implosion. Often it is an affair, but the affair is not the cause, it's the effect. So the home wrecker, the outside person, the man or woman who comes into the marriage, is an effect. They are not the cause of the divorce. They may have caused the final straw, but it's more like the knife going into Caesar is not something that was a spur of the moment thing. It was a well thought out, either emotionally or experienced some way, set of incidents that occurred along the way, separating two people and exploding or imploding from within. The question is, what drives a man to destroy what he claims to love? It's a very human thing in all sorts of ways. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explore the play Julius Caesar. And we're going to look at how Brutus and some of the characters within the story help us understand and think about, not know the answers necessarily, but think about so you can come up with your own answers to this question of what causes a man to, or what drives a man to destroy what he claims to love. That's something you should care about, because you might be destroying things that you love without even knowing it. You may not even understand that you're doing this. You may think, as you get older and older and your friends are being shed from your life little by little, well, it's just what happens with time. Well, yes, that is true. There is something to that. But It's also true that people often lose these relationships, their friendships, their romantic relationships, even relationships with their families, due to their own invisible issues, not psychological issues necessarily, but just their own machinations. And we can see this happening in this beautiful play, which takes this big movement. So it's a play about the moment when the Roman Republic symbolically dies. And that is when the assassination of Caesar occurs. It's the rise of Caesar, the assassination of Caesar, and then what happens afterwards. So what we have is the triumvirate, which happens after the death of Caesar, of Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavius. Octavius would become the Caesar of the first emperor Caesar Octavius. He's the first one. That's how that all ends. This is all history, ancient history, to Shakespeare when he's writing this in 1599. So that's the basic idea of what's going on, is we're seeing in this play the death of Rome and as the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. That's the essence of the play. But what Shakespeare does is he doesn't give you broad historical strokes. He doesn't give you characterological facts and Wikipedia facts. He shows you the internal world and desires and challenges and conflicts and drama of these characters that were involved in this epochal event in human history. So to do this without going through every aspect of this immensely important play, that I hope all of you will go watch a version of it, go read it, go listen to a podcast where there's podcasts or there's free audio where you can listen to performances of this to get a sense of it, and read it yourself, just something to explore on your spare time, whatever you do. I hope you will do that. But in order to give this a sense of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to home in on one particular section, which is Act 2, Scene 1. And I'll also, while I'm doing this, give you a couple of tips on how to read and enjoy and understand Shakespeare. At the beginning of Act 2, we have already had an introduction to Julius Caesar as he's coming in from a triumph, a parade in his honor for conquering Pompey, another Roman general. Now, this has never been done in Roman history at this point. This was a big turning point in Rome. When you first read Julius Caesar or see the play, you don't know or understand a lot of this. And this is why you need a little bit of context. The watchers of the play at the time, in 1599, the Elizabethan audience, from the lowliest plebe, the lowliest, commoner to the queen, all the educated people, everybody would have known some of the basics of Rome. Classicism was a dominant part of the conversation and part of that culture. We don't quite have that, so a lot of people may not know some of the details, but you can have a sense very easily. Just watch a couple YouTube videos of the synopsis. But the very beginning, you have these plebes in Julius Caesar who are idle, which is a unique incident in history where you have the majority of people, the craftsmen, are not doing anything, which is not common for peasants. This is actually a problem for Roman Republic and the history of Roman Republic, in a sense, is that these people have, all this idle time. They have, and now they're becoming enamored with one man. But as you get this opening scene of Act 1, Scene 1, you see these plebes out in their Sunday best. They're going around and they're celebrating Caesar, and these local officials come in berating them. Why are you doing this? Didn't you just cheer for the triumphs of Pompey, when Pompey, the general from Rome, who everybody loved, when he came and he used to conquer and bring, goods from overseas, from conquered lands, you loved him. Now you don't love him. Now you are attacking, or you're promoting and praising Caesar. What's going on? This is horrible. What is wrong with you people? And that's the essence of the beginning. They are cheering for Caesar. And then Caesar, is shown. He then, and then the play shows us a conversation between Brutus, who's one of the conspirators to kill Caesar, and Cassius, who's probably the architect of the assassination, and their deliberation. And after that, you get the beginning of Act 2, Scene 1, which is Brutus's internal monologue of, his internal soliloquy monologue of his understanding of his own motivations, or his attempt to understand, I should say. And then you have a conversation with the conspirators in Brutus's house, talking about the conspiracy itself and the actions they're going to take. And then you have a scene with Portia. So the point I want to make here really quickly as a side little tip on reading and enjoying Shakespeare is it's really important to recognize the scene. So understand the scene you're in, what happened before, what happened after, what's going on. It's a play, and a 5-act play in Elizabethan time doesn't quite operate in the way that a movie does today, which, has had hundreds of years of development into getting to what we have today, which is much more seamless and kind of helping you, I think, understand what the author is trying to imply. The Elizabethan authors and Shakespeare in particular really expects a lot out of you. Let's put it that way. He expects you to think and imagine and explore these as well. He's not going to tell you everything you need to know, all those details. You need to think about this on your own. So you have to be active. That's a big difference between classical plays and movies. So I want to read, I'm not going to read the whole little monologue here, but I want to read a couple passages of Brutus by himself in his garden, which is, you can think of that as symbolic of his mind, but he's thinking of himself in his orchard, and he's trying to debate whether he will kill Caesar. One piece of information that is pointed out in the play, but not emphasized. Again, this is a classical story that everyone kind of knew at this time, is that there was a lot of rumors, and it's very likely that Brutus might have been Caesar's biological son. And if not that, at very least, he was a surrogate son. He was a kind of son. Caesar was very father-like and a real father-son, not just in the Petrarchan, patriarchal, he's the father, the son, the holy, in that kind of Christian sense of just, or the tribal sense of the godfather type thing. No, this was really a patron of Brutus. So Brutus genuinely loves Caesar as a father, but he's conflicted by a desire, a duty to keep the Roman Republic a republic, that is, senators in charge, not one-man rule. So he says at the beginning of this is from my modernization, which you can get if you go to troubadour.studio. And again, you can join me for discussions of this and other works if you go to troubadour.studio, join the Literary Canon Club, and we can go from there. But Brutus says, it must be by his death. And for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him, but for the general good. He would be crowned. How that might change his nature, there's the question. It is the bright day that brings forth the adder, the snake, and that craves wary walking. Crown him that, and then I grant we put a sting in him. He goes on to talk about this analogistic way of how rising to this position of ultimate power that he's achieved, Caesar, has changed his very nature from what Brutus knew of him. So he concludes his little speech with the affirmation that he will actually do this deed of killing Caesar. And he says this, and since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing that he is. So in other words, Brutus is saying here, that we don't actually have any legitimate claim to harm him or to oust him, in a sense. So he says, and since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing he is, fashion it thus, make it that way. We're going to create that thing, that what he is augmented would run to these and these extremities. That's the extremities he's been talking about being a ruler that will kill people, have a sting in him and destroy and do harm to the republic and to the general good. And therefore think him as a serpent's egg, which hatched would as his kind grow mischievous and kill him in the shell. So he says we should kill him in the shell of a Republican general. Caesar is a consul of Rome, so he's a certain kind of elected, quote unquote, leader as a general. he's not a king officially. So kill him in the shell means kill him before he becomes a king, before he becomes a tyrant, before he becomes a one-man ruler. So we get a very highly rational, discursive argument that Brutus gives to himself. If you take him on the front face value, he is a really hyper-logical, rational person. He has come up with a series of arguments using analogy and rhetoric to convince himself that the reason he's doing this is because he fears Caesar will be a king, which may have some truth in it. Now, what's really important in this section is not only what Brutus tells himself. This is why this is such brilliant artistry. A lot of things happen in this whole section. We also get, in this scene, Cassius, who's the architect, sending manipulative letters to Brutus. So Cassius has one of the people go around putting letters around where Brutus will be, that the letters are written by the plebes or people in Rome, supposedly. And they kind of say things like, quote, Brutus, you sleep, awake, and see yourself. Shall Rome, be a tyranny, etc., etc., etc. Speak, strike, redress. These letters are kind of, and he's, reading them aloud, Brutus, as he gets them. He sees them in his window or things like that. And he's starting to, see, the people are behind me. But it's actually Cassius, another patron from a rich aristocratic family, who's doing this to Brutus. So on the one hand, Brutus is trying to claim to himself that he's doing this for the general good of the people of Rome, killing Caesar, and that there is this desire in him to right this wrong, and he's going to justify the assassination in that way. But then you have all these background elements happening in this moment. So you have Cassius sending those letters. And then you also see, what you see a lot of throughout this whole play, the undermining that Brutus does toward the achievement of his goal. So remember, his goal is to preserve the Republic as it was, and as his great-great-great-grandfather, Brutus, who killed some of the Tarquinian kings that initially started the Roman Republic. So Brutus himself comes from this lineage of doing that. But what you see are these series of undermining of what he claims to ideally want. Cassius is, part of this by manipulating him. But then too, you have a couple of examples in Brutus's house, same scene, Act 2, Scene 1, where the conspirators, Brutus, Cassius, Casca, Cinna, and others, they're around and they are trying to convince Brutus of certain actions to take. So for instance, they get two specific ones that really stand out. They recommend the Roman statesman and very revered and respected philosopher Cicero be included in the conspiracy. Brutus rejects Cicero's involvement, indicating to, I think, the audience and to everyone, even in the conspiracy, a fear of losing personal leadership. So they want, so it's an irony in a sense, is this whole conspiracy is to stop a one-man rule. And they have this one-man rule. So this one man, Brutus, undermines the conspiracy in a sense. And he's saying, no, I don't want Cicero. Why does he say I don't want Cicero? Quote, oh, name him not. Let us not break with him, for he will never follow anything that other men begin. In other words, he will be in charge. So Brutus, who's saying in a soliloquy to himself, this person's becoming a serpent because he's becoming one power. He's gaining all kinds of power. He's achieving big things. And because of that, it's causing him to undermine the very thing that we want, which is liberty and independent rule of having senators that respect, these rules of law separated from us. That's what we want. Caesar's against that because he's a one-man rule. And then Brutus goes and turns around and right next to his little monologue, he undermines all of that and says, no, I don't want this other man. Even though Cicero, who's an adamant defender of the Republic, probably is the best person to, actually oversee all of this, or at least add an air of gravity to it, which is what one of the other conspirators in this moment, Act 2, Scene 1, says. Well, we need his gravity. We need his gray hairs. We're just a bunch of young men. We're going to look really suspicious and ambitious. But with him, it adds this philosophical grandeur. And Brutus says, no, no, no. And they listen to him because they know they need his name. And they come from that world. And there's a sense here in the inevitability of the rise of an empire, that even if it wasn't Caesar, Brutus would have done it, Cassius would have done it, Mark Antony someone would have been an emperor. It was inevitable in a sense. That's part of what you get in the play. In the same moment as the Cicero debacle, the conspirators also ask about who else should be killed other than Caesar. So Caesar is the man that we're going to destroy because he's taking on all this power, but he's just one man in a whole machine. What about the other people? Who else, quote unquote, should be touched, meaning murdered? Well, they suggest, got to get rid of Mark Antony because he's the chief man. He's the number one person being taught and groomed by Caesar. So you got to get rid of that guy because he's going to cause problems for us in our achieving of this goal. What does Brutus say? Absolutely not, because then we will be butchers rather than a symbolic action. So he wants to, quote unquote, not be a butcher. He wants to have a symbolic action. This, again, is brilliant on Shakespeare's part, because that is precisely the image of Caesar that we've gotten so far, is that Caesar is adamantly interested in public symbolic gestures. So the first thing we see Caesar do when he's introduced in Act 1, Scene 2, is Caesar says Calpurnia, and he calls his wife over in front of everybody. It's during the procession. There's all these people on. Casca in the play announces, "Hold everybody, Caesar's talking." Like he's trying to get everybody's attention. And Caesar's calling his wife over publicly. This is a public gesture. And he says to Calpurnia, and I always picture this in the loudest voice possible, "Calpurnia." And Mark Antony, when Mark Antony goes on his race, this symbolic race, make sure you stand in his path so that he touches you, because you are infertile and we have not had a boy and we want a boy. So, and it's like that's how I kind of think of it in a sense, is that he's trying to make this public statement that his own infertility, or the infertility between his wife and him, which could have been caused by him. And at that time, they knew that men could be infertile. Men had sex with multiple women and none of them got pregnant. And, one man went in with the woman and she got pregnant. So it's like, they knew this back then. This wasn't like some modern understanding. So but he wants this public thing to say that it's not on me. It's not me. And he makes a public show of it. And he's doing all kinds of public shows. The most famous public show is when he rejects the crown 3 times, or a crown-ish type thing. So, and this is in the same scene, Act 1, Scene 2. Right at the beginning, you have Brutus and Cassius off to the side talking. If in the audience, if this is done well, you have this, you hear this in the background, which should be happening, is Cassius and Brutus hear the kind of, the crowd not approving, but kind of like approving of him rejecting of the crown 3 times. And we learn about this again. So we get it twice. Again, a kind of, it's emphasizing, but also portrayal of this double experience of how this is understood in the minds of the conspirators, of him rejecting it 3 times. What Caesar's really doing is he is testing the audience. And if you want a sense of this, just watch one of President Donald Trump's rallies. Watch him speak. I think he does this brilliantly. I don't agree with him. By the way, I don't like him, to be clear. I think that he has a lot of danger, but he is really good. I think he is the epitome of the market research president. It's like a new era of market research president, because what he's doing all the time, even when he says things like in his first presidency, he would say things like, we should be more like China's rulers and Saudi Arabia's rulers, where it's one man rule for life. And, he says these outlandish things. And what he's doing is brilliant. he's not, whether he believes it or not is irrelevant. What I think he wants is power. What all politicians want is power. That's not new. Caesar wanted power. What he's doing is testing you. He wants to know how you will respond to that. How will the newspapers take it? How powerful are the people who will take his side versus the people who won't take his side? How powerful is it when he says we want to get rid of all the immigrants? Well, when he says outlandish things, and who is defending? How powerful are the people defending? He is learning about you. Caesar is learning how close Rome is to the acceptance of one man rule. It's a public show that he does, and it's a performance. Mark Antony, who learns all of this, hands him this circlet, this crown. And Caesar says no, because he hears the crowd's not there yet. And it's a test. And then Mark Antony does it again. And we hear it's a little bit dimmer. And he does it again. And then Caesar faints. He has a falling sickness. So this whole thing is a charade. It's a play. It's a theatrical performance by the politician. And it's putting forth this new this test that Caesar has of people. And on a global, if we want to step back, I have to add this. Julius Caesar, the play by Shakespeare, is doing a brilliant job of that symbolic gesture to the Roman people is actually what happens. So Caesar is kind of going to, when he becomes assassinated, when he gets assassinated, he's going to the tribunes, the senators, to take on a crown, and he's killed because he's not allowed to get one. So he, just like he faints on stage, they're not quite ready for it, but the death of him causes that thing for them to, then they'd be ready for it. Once he's killed, now the people are right there. So they're right on the cusp. They need that big action, that event, and then they're ready for a global empire and an emperor, a one-man rule. So you have all of this going on, and you have all of this, these kind of little moments. And this is in the first 20 minutes of the 30 minutes of the play, right? This is, by the time we get here, we're talking Act 2, Scene 1. And you have all of this happening, and you see the individual desires of Brutus and Cassius all played out, and the destruction of the very thing that they claim to love. Caesar's one of the few people who doesn't actually quite destroy what he loves. Caesar sees himself as the North Star. He says that famously, I am the North Star. And then 10 seconds later, he's stabbed in the back by Casca, and then all the others stab him and he dies. Like, I'm the North Star. I am unmovable. I am unchangeable, and then dead. But the thing is, he was right. That's the thing. So who's the next person in charge after the civil war between the triumvirate, the Lepidus, Octavius, and Mark Antony, and Brutus and Cassius and their crew? Antony and Octavius and Lepidus destroy them, and then they fight the triumvirate, and then you get Octavius Caesar. So you get Caesar. So Caesar is the Northern Star. He is the only one. Everyone else destroys the thing that they love by not having a good combination of understanding of the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So just as a brief plot summary of the whole play, Caesar returns to Rome triumphant. That's the beginning. The conspirators, led intellectually by Brutus, assassinate him to, quote unquote, save the Republic. That's their goal. But the assassination itself is the birther. It's the actual laid egg that lead, we talked about the egg killing Caesar in the shell. The real egg that was laid was by the intellectuals that created chaos, civil war, and a new tyranny under Antony and Octavian, which then led to the rise of Octavius and the whole Roman Empire. And then the collapse of the Roman Empire eventually. But the real unique thing in reading Shakespeare, which I hope you'll understand as you read him and explore Shakespeare in this play, is the creation of Brutus. It's Brutus, who I think is a really unique character. Now, he's a Renaissance type. He's an archetype that other Renaissance thinkers are creating at this time. In fact, there's a whole system of different Renaissance writers in this era, the 15 and 1600s, who are writing like this kind of person. And it's very different than what came before it, which was much more a one-dimensional type of person. Even in the source work that Shakespeare uses, Plutarch's Parallel Lives of Julius Caesar in this case, the Brutus character, the Brutus person in that historical document by the ancient Greek Plutarch is very one-dimensional, really. He doesn't have these kind of real conflicts where he doesn't really know what's moving him internally, and he's contradicting himself in his own phrases and actions as well as his own thoughts and his desires. And he uses philosophical musings to kind of brood on this issue. That kind of brooding character is archetypical of a Renaissance character, and you see it even on the continent in Spain with Miguel de Cervantes in Don Quixote. And Don Quixote, which is this, playful kind of character, especially in the first act, or the first part, the major first part, is actually exploring the intermingling between what we think we understand about the world and the different perspectives we get from chivalric tales, pastoral romances, and all these different types of literature that was out in the world. And by part 2 of Cervantes' Don Quixote, you have a real deep musings by both Don Quixote and his side character, Sancho Panza, about all of this, just like, but in a very different way as you get with Brutus. Brutus embodies a really Renaissance archetype, idealistic, philosophically minded, yet deeply blinded to personal motivations, undermining his so-called noble intentions. So bringing this more together, like what drives a man to destroy what he claims to love? A big part of that is a blindness to his real motives and an inability to understand what is necessary to actually achieve an end, to have an ideal that is wedded to reality. So it's the disconnect that seems natural to idealists that causes this. Now, the issue is, this is right around the time when you were starting to get real philosophy coming and flourishing, and a particular strand of philosophy in the world of separating idealism from reality. I think that is a big part of the legacy of post-Roman world and post-Greco-Roman world in particular, is this splitting out of the ideal from the real, the practical. There's something natural in idealism that can lead you astray. And it's really important all the time to orient yourself to reality, to focus on reality, to have the North Stars just as guides, because you're going to be blown in one way and the other. Your sails are going to blow. You're going to have the waves are going to come in, which are affected by the moon. There's all kinds of things getting in the way of your ability to act and achieve exactly the vision you have. And so you need to figure out how to navigate those by the North Star and trying to get as close to there and in that direction as you can. But in a sense, you'll never quite get there. It's just not part of reality. But it's important to have it. And it's very, I think, practical to have that, because it's the only way to get to the better place. So the Renaissance idea that is kind of unique in this sense is the depths of the internal human world. Of course, people have always known that there were internal worlds, but how to portray that in a way that is digestible by humans was not really very explored, and not just in literature, but also in sermons, in the way we perceived each other, even in paintings. If you look at paintings in the early Renaissance, in the medieval times, what you get is you get very flat characters. You get flat surfaces. Everything's very flat. There might be a little bit of perspective, but very little. But starting in the Renaissance, you start getting more of this, really extending of the perspective. You have people in different positions, and you even have the creator himself. There's a famous painting called Las Meninas. And you could see this where the painter himself, who's the actual painter, he paints himself in the painting as he's painting one perspective, but there's a whole other perspective around there. That idea of all that's involved in human life, the internal, as well as the deep internal perspectives that we can hold, and all the ways that we can confound ourselves, that they're not from Athena or the gods above, Zeus, that they're causing this, that in a sense, there's these psychological motivations within us. And there's all these perspectives about that we have on the world. Some of those perspectives we don't even know. That is a very Renaissance idea. This outer and inner world and this self-blinding, that we can be blinded by things. And so what you have with Brutus is you have all these rationalizations. He's a brilliant philosopher. And I've noticed this in talking to philosophers, especially in talking to them in relation to a movement, is they have every kind of brilliant argument and logical syllogism about why what they're doing is the right way to do it. And yet what they're doing is wrong. It's clearly wrong because it's not achieving the ends that they're trying to achieve. And again, this going back to the movement that I've been a part of, it's just a landscape littered with bodies and people shedding out of this movement, which people should be entering into. And the reason is, in my opinion, because you have this kind of problem of that kind of intellectual, brooding intellectual who has not really the ability to see the internal machinations of what's necessary to make a movement and a cause actually happen. And Brutus is one of the early good examples of exploring that idea of the depths of the inner world, because he'll say one thing, he'll deliberate on one thing, and he'll smack right in the face of it. And we know that he ends in his own suicide, spoiler, and the whole thing collapses. And part of it is because this internal inability to contend with what he's really all about. I think you see that with Musk and Altman, where you just, even outside of the grudge between them, Altman publicly champions AI and its openness, yet privately he pushes for restrictive regulations. Right, so he and AI flourished in a world with very little government regulations. And then he goes in front of Congress and asks for regulations. And that is a clear destruction of what he's actually after. Whatever your views on regulations are, you don't have to agree with me or him. The point is, that kind of thing is he's internally destroying the thing that he champions. Now, why is he doing that? That's the question. And I think what we get here is this character of Brutus is this bigger, larger than life type character that has been explored by thinkers for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So since Caesar was killed in the Senate steps, men have been writing and talking about that assassination. It is a big moment in the history of the Western civilization. To our own point, it's even a part of our culture. It's how we think of, problems with one man rule. We don't like it in America. We don't like it in the West. We have a lot of, or at least it's a big part of the conflict in our time. Not only epochal experiences of this dilemma, what drives a man to destroy the things he loves. This happens on a personal level as well as on these global levels. So you might see this with workplace leaders. You're at a job, even within a big organization. I've heard this from people who are in part of organizations that have hundreds of thousands of people working there, and they're in one department. And you could see this happening where you have a leader or a boss who was a mentor to you, like Caesar was a mentor or a father to Brutus. You care about that person, but you see that the actions, the ideas, the advocacy of that person is actually undermining what they claim or what they've wanted to do and claim to do at this company. And it's leading to more and more problems. And you think that you have to do something at some point, or you might want to think that if you care about the organization. And whether you should act or not is an important question. The Renaissance has given us this perspective, this view on the complexities of mankind, that we can be driven by multiple motivations, often motivations we don't understand. But the important thing, I want to stress this, is that it's an internal view of humans, which we don't really get very strongly before this period. We get it a little bit, but not on this level. We really get a sense of the fullness of a human. And that's why you should read Shakespeare. And you should also read Shakespeare as a way to explore these types of questions. What drives a man to destroy the things he loves? Because that's what Brutus does. Part of the answer, I'll tell you, comes from understanding how to read the play itself, which we have lost that skill and we don't teach it very well today. But there's a totality to this play that when you see it and you step back from it and you look at what's going on and you know, oh yeah, everybody who's watching this, we all expect that Brutus is going to fail. We know that. There is an inevitability to the destruction because it's a historical event. So again, in subtle ways, Brutus is echoing the very principle that Caesar is claiming to be, and that is the one man. So on the one hand, Brutus is acting as though he is this person who doesn't want power and he's doing this for the general good. But on the other hand, he seems to be undermining that and he's actually after power. It's very possible that it's ambition itself, as it's often put, that is the actual antagonist in this play. Ambition. My claim about literature and literary art and imaginative works like this and Milton and Homer and Virgil and Dante and so many other of the great works is that they are the shapers of the DNA that makes us who we are when we're born, what we're born into in a sense. And you need to understand that to understand yourself. We often in the West have a kind of innate reaction to authority. Shakespeare was not the only one who created that, but he's the best voice of that idea. And you need to explore that to understand yourself when you're part of a movement. So going back to that intellectual movement I've been talking about that I've been a part of, when is it when you are actually trying to benefit the movement and what you're trying to do to get more people to engage with this philosophy? When is that your real motivation? And when is it that you just want to be the man in charge? That's the conflict. That's the issue. It's the same thing at work. You have that mentor that, the boss that worked for you or that you worked for that helped you, that you like, and you see him getting praised and raises and more promotions, and he seems to be on the rise and you don't. And you start looking at what's going on and you start to say, well, that guy's actually undermining everything we're trying to do. And you start undermining him. Maybe you even think about some public assassination, not in body, but in doing some big thing or something, a memo that undermines all of his work or something like that. When is that motivated in you by the stated goal that you and your organization are trying to achieve, the development of a new biomedical procedure, the rise of AI, against civil liberties, freedom and liberty, whatever it is that you have, economic liberty, whatever it is you're fighting for, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, I'm not going to go into all my views on that, but whatever the cause is that you're involved in, that cause should be the North Star that you're trying to achieve. When are your own inner motivations getting in the way of that? Your own ambitions, your own desires for something, your desires for accolade that you don't see yourself as getting, or you are getting accolades from one group and you think that's starting to bolster your desires. There's so many different things that you can explore and think about. But if you're unwilling to go there, which Brutus was not willing to go there, in the play, and we didn't go into the scenes where he doesn't, but there's scenes like with his wife where he's not willing to go and investigate his own real motivations. And that is the problem. And when does that happen to you? When do you sabotage your own friendships? So you say, in retrospect, my friendships have whittled away slowly, just being chipped away. Maybe it happens naturally. Maybe it's because you're not doing the right actions to protect and keep them and have flourishing relationships. And you're alone because you don't have flourishing relationships because you didn't work for them. Same thing with your romantic relationships, all these types of things. Besides a portrayal of this fantastically well-drawn character, Brutus, who we will see more of in Shakespeare, namely Hamlet, but this brooding intellectual. What we get is not only this portrayal of this Renaissance archetype in its best portrayal, that is a view of our inner life and the experience we have of the outer world that resonates with us today, but we also get a view of the problem of emotional repression And I'll tease you a little bit with that because this is where we're going to end, where the philosophy that Brutus has accepted explicitly, Stoicism, that becomes a major flaw in his ability to actually understand what he's really after, what he really desires, his own happiness and achievement, and all the things that he could have. He has this Stoic, veneer that he's put over him, the shield of Stoicism that shields him in a sense from the world, but it also shields him from understanding himself. And that's where we'll end. I hope you'll explore Julius Caesar. Come to troubadour.studio. Explore with me, explore with other people interested in this. It's a fantastic play, and it will help you go through this whole scenario that I've been talking about of what drives a man to destroy the things he loves. And hopefully you won't destroy the next thing that you turn to love.